acknowledge some of the people who are here. We have with us our first assistants, Judge Carolyn Engel-Temin and also Robert Listenby. We have with us ADA Joanne Pescator, who is the supervisor of the DAO's Homicide and Non-Fatal Shooting Unit. Reverend Myra Maxwell, who is the executive director of our DAO's Victim Support Services Division, is here with Melanie Nelson, who is the director of our CARES unit, also known as the DAO's Crisis Assistance, Response, and Engagement for Survivors unit. That's the group who work intensively with the families of homicide victims, especially during the first 45 days after a homicide. We have ADA Deborah Watson-Stokes, who is a senior advisor for professional development and special projects. Many of those special projects relate very directly to gun violence. And we have Assistant DA Helen Park, who is with our Homicide and Non-Fatal Shooting Unit and has done an absolutely amazing job successfully prosecuting this contract killing. She is accompanied by Detective Torsten Lucky, who is here on behalf of himself, but also his partner, Detective Daly, who did a really amazing job in the investigation of this case and in collaborating very effectively in the successful prosecution of Mr. Haynes. Let me turn to some of the data around gun violence that we have. In general, the time period we're looking at is August the 4th of 2022 through August the 10th. However, when it comes to the number of homicides, that will be to date. In other words, as of August the 14th at 11:59 p.m., we were at 344 homicides year to date. Last year, it was 336 homicides. Therefore, we have 8 more than last year, which is an increase of 2%. During the period of August the 4th through August the 10th, there were 11 homicides and 33 non-fatal shootings. As you may well know, the average during the pandemic period has been about 10.5 homicides per week. Obviously, none of this is okay. Every bit of this is terrible. But sadly, that is a little bit worse than average, to have 11 homicides in a week. 33 non-fatal shootings occurred during that same period, and there were 126 gun-related incidents. So that we understand, this is a combination of gun possession cases, but also cases involving a gunpoint robbery or a shooting. Of those 126 gun-related incidents brought to the attention of police, there were 90 arrests made by law enforcement. Of those 90 arrests, the DA's office brought 89 cases that we opened and charged. The median bail, according to our data, for illegal possession of guns was set at $200,000. Understand that in the vast majority of those cases, we requested $1 million. And the median bail set for violent offenses committed with guns, that would be robberies, it would be shootings, it would be other violent offenses committed with guns, was $250,000. In essentially every single one of those cases, we requested $1 million or more. I'm going to turn to 3 homicide matters that occurred during this time period. First is not a shooting. It is a stabbing incident, a homicide stabbing that occurred on Friday, August the 12th in the 2000 block of South 20th Street in the 1st Police District. At 12:24 a.m., a 64-year-old black woman was found stabbed multiple times. She was pronounced on the scene by medics. An arrest has been made by the Philadelphia Police Department. However, this investigation remains ongoing. Anyone who has information should contact the PPD's homicide unit at 215-686-3334. The suspect, who has been arrested in connection with the killing of the 64-year-old woman, is 16, and he was arrested the same day. He is the victim's stepson. No information on arraignment has been provided yet. ADA Joanne Pescator will be here, of course, to answer any questions to the extent she is able on homicide matters and shooting matters. Second incident was a shooting incident. It is a double shooting with 1 homicide, 1 fatality. On Friday, August the 12th, in the 2600 block of North Bouvier Street, Bouvier, as some say it, in the 22nd Police District at about 10:18 p.m. An approximately 19-year-old black male was found shot 17 times throughout the body. He was taken to Temple Hospital, where he was pronounced a short time later. That is victim number one. Victim number two, a pregnant 20-year-old white female was shot 3 times in the head. She was taken to hospital by police and placed in critical condition initially. She is still alive, and she is undergoing treatment. No arrest has been made by PPD. This investigation remains ongoing. Anyone with information should contact PPD's homicide unit at 215-686-3334. The third and final homicide I would like to talk about is a shooting incident, a homicide that occurred on Saturday, August the 13th, in the 2000 block of North 22nd Street in the 22nd Police District at about 3:49 a.m. Excuse me. An 18-year-old black male was shot once in the left rib cage. He was pronounced on the scene by medics. No arrest has been made by PPD. This investigation remains ongoing. Anyone with information should contact PPD's homicide unit at 215-686-3334. It shouldn't have to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. Please come forward. If you have information, we need your help. The Philadelphia Police Department needs your help. They need you to come forward. You know that this office is going to try to make sure that the right people are held accountable. You know that we're going to try to be fair and do it the right way. Please come forward. We need your help. We need your help to make sure that there is justice for victims, that there is safety in the streets, and it means we need you to come forward and to give information. And yes, we will do everything in our power to protect you. The police will do everything in their power to protect you. I will work with the feds to do everything in our power to protect you, but we need you to come forward. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce Melanie Nelson, head of our CARES unit, who will give a weekly report on behalf of the DAO's Victim Support Services Division, to include the CARES report as to families who have been served by Victim Services and by CARES over the last week. Melanie?
Good morning. The CARES unit provided services to 12 families, and that we were helping with 36 services that were needed. So I know some of you want to know what those services could include. Just as DA Krasner said, are people who do not say anything because they're in fear for their lives. So when our responders reach out to the families, we discover that information, and we try to put them in the hands of someone in the Victim Services unit that will be able to help them. We have some families that may be in need of food. We'll find resources for them, for that mother who's not eating because her son or her daughter was murdered. We have resources for those who do not have life insurance for their loved one, and they don't know how they're going to bury their loved one. Think about that Muslim child who has to be buried within 3 days, and the families do not have any funds. The CARES responders will find resources for those families. So every service is unique to every family, but that's what our responders do. We assess, we love, and we jump into action. So if anyone is in need of services, please do not hesitate to contact the CARES unit, and we will be more than happy to service your needs. Peace and blessings.
And if I may quote Melanie, we care. All right, at this point, we're going to turn to our other topic, and that has to do with James Haynes, a man who thought he could pay people to kill people, and now is looking at life without parole plus 23 and a half to 47 years because he couldn't. It was not okay, and he is being held accountable. It is my pleasure to introduce ADA Helen Park, who did an absolutely marvelous job with this difficult case, and will speak about the case and the excellent work that was also done by the detectives, Detectives Daly and Detective Lucky, who is here with us. After ADA Park's comments, we will then address, I'll come back up, and then we will address questions from journalists. Thank you.
Thank you, DA Krasner. Good afternoon. Christian Eldridge was a 27-year-old member of our community. He was murdered on February 17th of 2020 during a drive-by shooting that occurred at the intersection of North Bouvier Street and Erie Avenue. He leaves behind a grieving family. They did not wish to be present today. However, they did ask me to express that they are finally able to feel some level of peace due to the way and the fact that this case was a conviction. I want to go into some of the facts, but I think the sort of broad strokes view of this investigation is that it was truly a peeling of an onion. Layer by layer, homicide detectives were able to determine the identity of the individuals who committed the shooting. They were identified as two men by the name of Aaron Page and Edwin Martinez. They were able to painstakingly review video surveillance in the area, interview witnesses, and get information with respect to the vehicle that drove by and committed this drive-by shooting. As I said, layer by layer, they were able to ascertain the identities of these individuals. On June 18th of 2020, with the help of the ATF, the U.S. Marshals, and the the ATF and the U.S. Marshals, homicide detectives went to Aaron Page's residence that was at the 4300 block of Germantown Avenue. Mr. Page was in the apartment. He barricaded himself, and he ultimately took his own life by shooting himself in the head. On location, detectives recovered the cell phone belonging to Mr. Aaron Page. They were able to go through, and Detective Daly painstakingly and relentlessly reviewed every single piece of data, whether it's a text message, a photograph, social media post, etc. And he was able to determine the identity of James Haynes as being the individual who not only orchestrated and facilitated, but also paid Mr. Page and Mr. Martinez for their services, essentially. In July of 2020, with the help again of the ATF, the U.S. Marshals, and this time the Warrington Police Department, we were able to arrest Mr. Haynes at his home. At his home, we recovered $33,880 U.S. currency dollars in cash, one Glock firearm, one Taurus 9mm firearm, a 50-round capacity extended drum magazine. All of these weapons were loaded, 2 iPhones and 2 laptops. Further investigation into his phone and his other electronic devices revealed further evidence. With the help of a forensic analyst who is at the FBI, we were also able to extract data from the vehicle that was used in the drive-by shooting, infotainment extraction of sorts. And Detective Lucky, who's here today, was able to synthesize all of this data, not only the cell data records, the location of the cell phones, but also the GPS coordinates from the vehicle, was able to create a visual demonstration, if you will, or a visual presentation of all of that data. I cannot express enough the amount of work, the amount of perseverance, the amount of determination that went into this investigation, not only in its initial stages, but also following through to the jury trial. To present this evidence to a jury was incredibly difficult simply because of the volume and because of the different unwieldy ways that data is extracted without the expert skill of both detectives, this trial would not have been able to be presented to a jury. Last week, Thursday, August 11th of 2022, Mr. Haynes, James Haynes, was convicted by a jury of his peers. He was sentenced by the Honorable Glenn Bronson to a life sentence without parole, plus a consecutive term of 23 and a half to 47 years. I'd like to thank not only the Philadelphia Police Department, Homicide Crime Scene Unit, all of the individuals that were involved, the FBI resources, the Warrington Police Department. I'd also like to thank my supervisors in the homicide unit, without whom I could not have done this trial. And finally, I'd like to thank the other ADAs in the unit who work painstakingly and relentlessly every day, and were there to support me not only in covering my other cases while I was on trial, but providing guidance and advice. So this was truly a team effort, and I would like to acknowledge everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, ADA Park. All right. So we're going to follow our usual protocol in requesting and interacting with journalists who are here. Obviously, I recognize that when we have camera operators who may be receiving texted questions, they are journalists as well. And so what I would like to do is call on various journalists and see if there are questions that they have about the matter we're here to discuss, or if anything else that is reasonably related to what we are here to talk about. From CBS 3, we have Jasmine. I know I'm going to mess this name up. Jasmine, can you please tell me how I pronounce it properly? I don't want to be that guy. Payute. Okay, we have Jasmine Payute, who is here with camera operator Ed. What may I do for you? Do you have any questions?
Any comment on just the rash of incidents involving hit and run crashes? We've had a couple over the weekend, and just, I believe, so far we're on pace to exceed last year. Any comment on what's being done about that?
I can tell you that when you say hit and run, you're not necessarily speaking of fatalities. You're speaking of situations in which someone is hit, struck by a vehicle, then the vehicle takes off. Well, I will say this, it's a crime, and it's a serious crime. And anyone who is engaging in that kind of conduct is going to pay for it. If you're involved in a crash, DUI or not, stop. Render aid. Call the police. Stay there. The only thing that you will do by running from the scene is make the situation worse for you, potentially leave the victim of that accident in a worse situation. It is just not acceptable. We have to care about each other enough to be willing to stop, render aid, be there to answer questions, address the needs of law enforcement and the medical needs of what has just occurred there. So beyond that, I can't speak for the Philadelphia Police Department. I know they take these issues incredibly seriously, but I can't speak for them. I'm sure the commissioner probably may have some comment, but if it comes across our desk in our capacity as charging and as prosecuting, we take it very seriously. Are there any other questions?
If someone does stop, that doesn't free them of any liability from the crash, does it?
No. It's, as you know, there are many crashes that are not actually criminal in nature. There are even some crashes where you have terrible medical outcomes that are not necessarily criminal in nature. Crimes are more than mistakes. They're more than accidents. But if the accident results from criminal conduct, recklessness that rises to the level of criminal conduct, being under the influence of drugs and alcohol in a way that caused it, if it rises, or driving 60 miles an hour in a zone that should be 30 miles an hour, when the behavior becomes outrageous enough to supply criminal intent, when it's there, then there will be charges for everything else. But my point is, don't make it worse. Whatever the situation is, stop, because fleeing the accident in and of itself is criminal conduct, and we're not going to tolerate it. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you. From Action News, we have Jack Harper.
He left, I took his place.
Oh, you did? Okay. Aliana is here. Aliana Gomez? Did I pronounce it right?
You did.
Okay. Is there something we can do for you, Ms. Gomez?
I've got several questions.
critical. Any update on the baby? Because I believe law enforcement said that night that that she was 7 months pregnant.
I do not have an update. I think there are two people here who may have information on that. So if you just give me 1 second, let me see if I can get you an answer on that.
No update. There's no update.
We don't have an update on the health of the mother or the child. We don't have an update on that. I can tell you we know that she's alive. I have heard some things that are going in a better direction, but I can't confirm them. I know that she's alive. I know she continues in treatment. And obviously a lot of us are very hopeful that things will get better, but I don't have an update for you. I'm sorry. Do you have more questions?
Yes, involving the murder for hire plot. I'm not aware, you're not aware of that particular case that happened before I got here. If you could provide more details about surrounding the motive, the amount, the monetary value involved in hiring those two men to shoot the victim. And I've noticed we've had some plaintiffs support the victim here in that case.
I'm going to let ADA, I think I know the answers to these questions, but I would prefer that she answers. I'm going to let ADA Park answer those questions.
So yes, the photo is of Mr. Eldridge and his, that's Mr. Eldridge. There is a second photo, that would be Mr. Eldridge and his son. And we don't have an exact motive that's been confirmed. The suspicion, and based on the way that the text messages read, is that it was over drugs, drug territory specifically, the 18th and Tioga block, and the individuals associated with that area were specifically targeted. The payment is a little difficult to extract because there are other killings and shootings that are also discussed on these text messages. I can't go into too much detail about those. Those are still ongoing, open cases. But the ultimate payment that was made the following day, I believe, was $15,000. There were two people that were shot on February 17th. One was Mr. Eldridge, who ultimately died, succumbed to his wounds. The other individual did not die. He was shot, however. So the understanding was that it was going to be $20,000 for two people. $15,000 was the ultimate payment.
Thank you for that. And you mentioned the other killings and text messages. Are you under the impression that Mr. Haynes is also potentially involved in the killing of other people in the city?
That is still under investigation.
I don't believe I have more questions. I think, are you guys sending something out about more details about that particular case and the conviction?
Yes, I imagine so.
We are sending more out, but if you have a specific question that you'd like to address now, we can try to do it now.
I think that's it, just more information on what happened, but basically underlying motive is drug crime.
Yes,
A known drug dealer.
Mr. Haynes is associated with Erie Avenue, east of Broad, a group. And I believe the other individuals that are mentioned, along with Mr. Eldridge in the text messages, are OBH, Original Block Hustlers. That's, as you know, these groups, their names often change over time, and they assume sort of newer identities, if you will. But that is the original information that I had. Again, with the changing nature of the groups, I'm not entirely sure of what the current situation is.
Will the release include a mugshot of Haynes? Or could you
I can
provide
answer
one?
that. It most likely will not. We generally do not release mugshots unless there's a specific reason to do that.
And this would not warrant that?
There's a very long history of some bad things that have come from media putting out mugshot after mugshot after mugshot, and we don't want to be a part of that. When there is a reason to do so, for example, we have a defendant, not a defendant, we have a suspect who is fleeing, and identification of the suspect for apprehension is worth it. We want it, but we do not want to be part of some of the problems that, frankly, have gotten us to become such a dangerous society. So in general, no. In general, we do not put out those mugshots. Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And let me see, Fox News, we have Pete Santo?
No question.
No questions? All right. Well, there being no further questions, thank you all for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at our next press conference. Thank you.